So there we go. Welcome everyone to this webinar. We've got an hour, and I can see that lots and lots of people are coming on board. I guess the first thing that we should say is that this meeting is being recorded, and we intend to post it to the webinar. The chats are also being recorded, so if you are sensitive about being identified in the chat or something, perhaps don't chat, or you can just wait until we load the recording up to the internet, to the website. So it'll be on the bpdaustralia.org website. And is it going on the US side as well, Perry?
Yes, it will.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I thought I'd just start with introducing our panellists. My name's Jennie Fitzhardinge, and I'm a Family Connections co-facilitator. I'm a counsellor in private practice, and as is everyone, with the exception of Jake, who I think we should get on the steering committee. Everyone that's on the panel is on the steering committee for NEABPD Australia. So I'd like to start with introducing Perry. Maybe say hi so that at least your face comes up for those people that have got you on this. There's two options with the Zoom, is that you can have speaker view or a tiled view, which I think is possibly going to be a bit confusing with 140 people online. Yes, Perry Hoffman is the president of NEABPD in the US and the co-founder of the National Education Alliance for BPD. And she's the chair of NEABPD Australia, and most importantly, the co-author of the Family Connections program, which is a psychoeducation program for carers or family members and friends who have a loved one with borderline personality disorder. We also have Carolyn Bright. Do you want to say hi, Carolyn, so people can see your face?
Yeah, hello, that's me. Yeah.
Carolyn's a clinical psychologist and a DBT, dialectical behaviour therapy clinician at Fremantle Hospital. And she's, as well as being a Family Connections co-facilitator, she's a Family Connections leader trainer. So in December in Western Australia, if you're here and you want to do the leaders training, Carolyn and I will be helping Carolyn, but yeah, you'll get to meet us in December. We also have Terri-Lee Hill. Terri-Lee, you want to say hi?
Hello.
There she is, yeah. She's a senior social worker and accredited mental health social worker at La Trobe Regional Hospital and Mental Health Services, and she also has a private practice in Gippsland. Did I get it right? Victoria?
Yes, well done.
I've had it wrong in my head for so long. And we have Liz Hodgman. Would you like to say hi, Liz?
Hi, everybody.
So Liz Hodgman is also a Family Connections leader and a carer extraordinaire. She's a member in the steering committee for the brand new in South Australia, or it hasn't been made yet, but the steering committee for the BPD Centre for Excellence, or is it the Centre for Excellence for BPD, Liz?
Something like that.
Something like that. Anyway, it's an exciting initiative in South Australia, and we're all really looking forward to hearing more about that. And we have Jake Hodgman. Jake, do you want to say hi?
Hey, everyone.
Jake is here as a person with lived experience of borderline personality disorder, and he is Liz's son, and that story is quite amazing, so I'm looking forward to you hearing that. And we've got Mary Cantrell. Do you want to say hi, Mary?
Hi.
Mary is our coordinator extraordinaire, and you would have been emailing her back and forth, and Mary coordinates all the groups as well. So we just thought we'd introduce Mary so you would have a face to put to all those emails. Okay, I think, I haven't left anyone out, have I? And just on the nuts and bolts of the Zoom call, we're not unmuting people because, you know, we do have such a large number of people registered. and online, and but you can. Okay. Sorry, I can see that some people are having problems with the audio, but you can post questions in the chat. Your chat button is, if you put your mouse over the screen, and all the options will come up, and you can just click on the chat there, and you'll be able to see the chat on the right-hand side of your screen. I'll try and keep an eye on that. And yeah, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions in the time we have available.
Jennifer, I didn't mean to, I don't want to interrupt, but Dustin and I are also checking those audio problems and working with people as well. So I don't want you to worry about that. We're watching it for you.
Yeah, no, I'm not worrying about the technical. No, it's more about if people want to ask questions about family connections or BPD. I'm ignoring everything else. Thank you, Cynthia. We love you. Yes, yeah. So Cynthia and Dustin are our technical support today. So yeah, if you're having a problem, you can message them privately as well, if that's easier. Okay, so Perry, I've lost you on my screen. So are you still there?
Yeah, when I talk, I assume I'll pop up. Great.
Yes, you have. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, we'll do that thing where we mute ourselves. So can you take us back to the beginning? How did you come to create the Family Connections program with Alan Frazzetti?
So let me start with first telling you a little bit about NEABPD, because without NEABPD, I don't think Family Connections would have been able to be disseminated to such a wide audience. And NEA in the United States got started in 2001, and it stemmed from a research meeting that was being held in New York City. It was really one of the first BPD research meetings with all the big experts there. I was sitting in the audience and happened to also sit next to some carers that I didn't know before, but we were chatting and I was thinking, all this wonderful data, and when will families hear about it? Probably 5 years from today, because by the time things get into publication and then more into the public domain, you know, it's almost old news. So the group that I had connected with that day, we decided to meet, and we set up a meeting a month later, which actually, unbeknownst to us, obviously, was 3 weeks before 9/11. But we decided that we wanted to do something to put borderline personality disorder on the map in the United States. We have the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I'm sure most of you have heard of that, but it didn't take BPD as its priority population. So we decided we'd start this organization. We were 4 family members, 2 consumers, and 1 mental health professional. That was me. And the first thing we thought we would do is to do a conference. So we decided just boldly to call Dr. John Gunderson, who some of you might know is the father of the disorder. And he was so gracious and said, if you do a meeting, I'll be there. Just give me the date. And so we knew then that we had the right foot going, because then when you call someone like Marsha Linehan and you say, John Gunderson is coming to the conference, will you come speak? She said, of course I'll come speak. And it just snowballed. And that conference took place a year later. We had 500 people there. It was really the first conference on borderline personality disorder. But that was sort of gave us the cornerstone of what we were going to do. And we set out what our mission was to help those people impacted by the disorder. And it was really about building public awareness, providing education, hosting conferences, etc. We were very fortunate because our first conference was so successful that we then got a grant from the National Institute of Mental Health that allowed us to supported us to do 5 more conferences. And because, as in NEA Australia, we are all volunteers, we parlayed that money for 5 conferences into 25 conferences. And so things just snowballed, and we've been very fortunate to be able to be recognized as with a lot of not authority, but authenticity, and the fact that what we do is we don't have a second agenda at all. It's really about promoting awareness on the disorder. So that was the genesis of NEA in the United States. And about 5 years prior to that, Marshall Linehan, who is the developer of DBT, introduced me to Dr. Alan Frazzetti. Alan was in Nevada and I was obviously in New York where I live. And she said, the two of you need to meet because you're doing similar work together. And I'm sure that if you put your efforts together, you could maybe even do more. So Alan and I became very fast friends and collaborators then. And I was fortunate to have a grant, a personal grant from the National Institute of Mental Health. And I had to put together a study, something for families, because my grant was focused on families. So we decided that what we would do is put together a 12-week course, which we now know is called Family Connections. And we would take material from some of what Alan was doing, some of what I was doing, excuse me, putting together a lot of information, because at that point, and unfortunately even today, if you go on the internet, what you read makes you feel quite hopeless and you feel that people won't get better, etc. So we put all this accurate information right up front as the first two modules of the Family Connections course. And things just sort of grew. I mean, and Alan and I, sometimes we say to each other, did we ever think it would get to this level? But I think the content has had an impact on people, and it's made a difference. So once we got it going in the United States, then there was this wonderful woman from Australia named Anne Reeve, who I'm hoping some of you know. And Anne got the course started in Australia. She brought Alan in for a training. You have your own trainers there. She started NEABPD Australia, and that was sort of how things began to snowball. We now are in other countries as well, modeled after what Anne has done in Australia. We're in Italy, we're in Israel, we will be in Ireland soon. We have a partnership in Canada, which has been very productive. But things have just sort of generated out, and it's thanks to all the wonderful volunteers who've made this possible. I'm sure those of you who know Family Connections know that people don't get paid to do it. The leaders come in, they come as volunteers, they stay as volunteers, and that's sort of how the program has been laid out. And that's where we are today.
Yeah. Fantastic. So I might just, on that sort of note about with the leaders, thought I might flick over to you, Liz, and talk about your experience as being a carer and hearing about the Family Connections program and how that worked out for you.
Sure. To sort of answer that well, I need to tell you some of my story. Jake is the eldest of my 3 children. He's now 41, and he's been diagnosed, excuse my voice, it's croaky, being diagnosed with BPD, anxiety, depression, and PTSD. He was always a really sensitive child, but the real difficulties in our relationship emerged in his teens. By his late teens, his rages were frequent, and I was traumatised. I was both afraid of him and afraid for him. I didn't know what to do. I didn't understand BPD, and nor did any of the people around me who were trying their best to support me. In hindsight, this isn't surprising at all, as although things are getting better, it's been poorly recognised in the past and stigmatised, and it still is to some degree, quite a significant degree, I think. Things deteriorated further, and when Jake was in his early 30s, he chose to estrange himself from me and his dad. This was devastating. I couldn't fix the problem, but I didn't really know what the problem was. He was blaming me for everything, for things not right in his life, and my self-confidence was pretty low. It got to the point where I thought he would either kill himself or me. I sought counselling when he was in his 20s, and that is when I first heard about BPD. This is before he was diagnosed. At that point, I decided to throw myself into learning all I could about BPD so that if and when we reconnected, I would know more about how to help him. None of my previous work and life experiences had adequately prepared me for the chaos, worry, confusion, guilt, fear, shame and grief that I was experiencing. I had an echo there. Is it coming through all right?
Yeah,
yeah?
That's fine.
Okay. I trained as a teacher. I have a postgraduate counselling qualification, and I've had a varied career in a wide variety of human services roles, but none of these things had prepared me adequately for living with BPD and my family. Caring for someone with BPD requires lots of knowledge and understanding about the illness and practice in applying particular skills. Caring is also most effective when the carer has really good support to help cope with and living daily with the chaos and enormous challenges that BPD can bring. One of the first things I did was to buy 6 copies of a book about BPD and give them to my family and friends who were wanting to know how to support me. That was actually really helpful, as I no longer had to try to explain what BPD was, and they were better able to appreciate the help that I needed. I arranged to take time off work to attend monthly meetings of the Adelaide-based Sanctuary BPD Carer Support Group. It was through Sanctuary that I met other carers experiencing what I was and heard about other opportunities for learning about BPD, including family connections. I grabbed the opportunity to attend leader training with Professor Alan Prezzetti when he visited Adelaide in 2015 to help get family connections off the ground in Australia. I now co-lead family connections programs in Adelaide. I really do attribute the positive changes in my new 1-year-old relationship with Jake to a range of things, including the work Jake has done on himself. It takes willingness on both sides. From my end, the family connections training I did helped me enormously and pulled together everything else I had learned up to that point. So here are some of the things I learned from family connections. I learned what BPD is and why it is hard to respond to. For example, when someone is dysregulated, they are unable to reason or apply logic in a way that makes sense to others. There is no point trying to offer suggestions or advice. In fact, it's quite invalidating. When I did this with Jake, it only escalated his behaviour. I learned that we're all doing the best we can with what we know, both the carer and the person with BPD. I learned that the person with BPD is not deliberately trying to manipulate or attack, although it really does feel like that to the carer quite often. I learned that our recall of events and our perceptions are often very different, but still valid for each of us. It wasn't that he was lying to me, nor was it about us trying to change each other's minds. I learned that my part in changing our relationship meant changing the way I responded to him, not relying on Jake to change. And I learned the power of listening and how and when to validate. Early last year, I had an opportunity to apply the skills I had learned through family connections. At the time, there were crises happening within our family, so Jake's dad and I decided to try to contact him. This led to 2 face-to-face meetings with him, each over 2 hours long. This was a huge, and I have to say, pretty scary step, as at that point we had been estranged for 8 years. At the second meeting, Jake became so enraged and so dysregulated that we came away pretty shaken up and convinced that we would probably never see him well again. However, we didn't know it then, that this was a big turning point in our relationship. We had occasional contact in the following months, and I, very nervously, as it was a big risk for me to take, then invited him to come to one of our borderline personality disorder awareness week activities in Adelaide in October last year. That turned out to be another positive in our developing relationship. Since then, our relationship has gradually grown in confidence and strength, and we are now much more relaxed in each other's company. He's here in the house tonight, so that says something. Just before last Christmas, when Jake and I were having lunch together, we both agreed we never thought this new relationship would ever happen. I asked Jake what had helped him in his journey, and he said that what had made the difference for him was that his dad and I just listened when we met him those 2 times early last year. During those meetings, we didn't ask questions, give advice, or make suggestions. Jake, to his credit, has also been doing some work on himself, and I'm still finding out about that. We now have a whole new relationship. It's tentative, but it's one that I still refer to as a miracle. It's been so profound for me. We're still finding our way with each other, but we're enjoying what we have now. I can't thank Family Connections enough for helping me to make sense of all of it. It was life-changing for us. I hear this from other carers who come to the programs that I lead too. I'd encourage any carer, family member, friend or colleague of someone with borderline personality disorder to register with the program. It's worth it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing that, Liz. And it's only, one question before I flick to Jake. Somebody was wanting to know what the name of the book was that you gave everybody.
Well, I didn't say the name of the book because some people don't like it. It's called Stop Walking on Eggshells. It was the first book that I saw. It looked easy to read. It proved to be friendly to share with other people so that they didn't have to labour through a long, big, intensive book. So Stop Walking on Eggshells by Randy Kruger. I think it's worth a read.
She's actually updated it. So there's an updated version of it now. I don't know if that reads the right way for people.
Oh, no, that's not the book.
Yeah, I know, but it's Randy Kruger.
Hang on, I've got the book to show you.
Yes, but what I was going to say is that she's updated Stop Walking on Eggshells, and this is a more recent version of her work. So it's actually more up to date.
Right,
I think
this is the one that I handed out, but as you say, probably better to get the updated version.
Yeah, which is the Essential Family Guide to Borderline Personality Disorder. Okay, so Jake, there's two questions I want to ask you, so I'm going to ask them both at the start. One is, what was it like to get the diagnosis of BPD? And this, because that's one that's come through from other people as well. And secondly, you know, how did your mum and dad doing? Did your father do family connections as well? Or at least your parents becoming more educated about BPD impact on you?
Okay, cheers. And thanks, Mum. I'd just like to start. I'll just give a shout out to the men who are taking the time to be involved tonight, because I think we're underrepresented, and I just want to say that every single one of you that gets involved is helping the next bloke in line. So thank you for that. Mum basically covered me. I sound pretty horrible when I was younger. And I kind of need to point out that I get told I present too well. This was actually something that delayed my diagnosis, I guess, is that I would present really well and people wouldn't think that I was someone who was mentally unwell. Even this week I've been at things and people have assumed I'm staff. So I just want to let those of you who have BPD or have seen it, yes, I have been that screaming mess in the corner. I've been that sobbing ball in a hospital room. I've got cigarette burns on my hands. I have had suicidal ideation. I've been pretty close to it. So I just want you to take that on board. People often ask me, how do I get my partner, loved one, myself to be like you? It's a long road. And I think what we're covering tonight with Family Connections is important because it was a big part of connecting back with my family. The name says it all. So for the first question, what was getting a diagnosis like? It was a relief. I'd been piling up diagnoses that would, I actually got up to triple depression. My doctor described it as minor on major on endogenous, so born that way, have major episodes and then situational stuff comes up. Didn't quite ring true for me for everything. It didn't explain why I would be on extreme highs as well as extreme lows. And when I was first introduced to BPD when my doctor handed me an article called "When Passion is the Enemy," and that spoke to me because I get really passionate about things. I'll get passionate about being happy about them. I'll get passionate about being sad about them. Like everyone else with BPD, I feel intensely, and at times, as they say, there's no emotional skin, there's no protection. It's like having third-degree emotional burns, to quote Marshall Linehan. So when you feel that intensely, depression didn't quite cover it. Anxiety, yes. PTSD, yes. But BPD was the first diagnosis that actually made sense, actually made me stop questioning whether I was insane. The thought crosses your mind when everyone in the world tells you you're wrong, or every conversation is about trying to fix you, or you ask something that would be answered normally by anyone else and the response is, but yes, but you've got depression or mental illness. That's all completely invalidating. And it was that ongoing invalidation that really drove me down. And I'll get to that in a minute. But my reaction when my doctor said to me, I think you might have borderline personality disorder, my reaction was, does that mean I almost have a personality? He laughed and said, no, you've bloody well got a personality. But it meant that I could then focus on what that was. I was introduced to the 9 criteria for BPD, and I ticked all 9. I still do on odd days. I go back and check the list occasionally to see how I'm faring, but I had to learn to accept it. And once you accept that you've got this diagnosis, it becomes a lot easier. You drop the stigma that you hold within yourself. And for me anyway, I was able to be open about it and start having conversations with other people. And that then led to breaking down barriers. Thanks, Mark. As Mum mentioned, I chose to estrange myself from the family, well, from Mum and Dad in particular. And at first, I think the rest of the family took it on board that I didn't want to be involved with them either. And I quickly corrected my cousins on that. I still love my family very much. I still appreciate all their support. At the time, I couldn't deal with Mum and Dad because I was living in a state of constant grief, or flipped over the other side, totally disassociate from that grief and not have that be part of my life at all. It got to the point where the thought of seeing my dad, and I'm not sure if you're on tonight, Dad, but if you are, hi. There was a time where I couldn't even picture seeing my dad in my head. I would get angry just seeing him. And much the same with Mum. I could look at Mum, but having a conversation with her, I would get triggered. I'd tell her something, I'd see a little eyebrow go up like that. I would misread a micro expression, and I'd go, "You're not listening." It was black and white thinking. You're either on my side or you're not. I had. Well, I got to say, when I was raised with Mum alone from the age of 7. Dad left when I was 7, went to Adelaide. I'd still see him a few times a year, but it was myself and my brother and sister living with Mum. And we were raised to talk about our emotions. I think as a way of Mum trying to manage us all. So it was, "Jake, you're angry. Tell me how you're feeling and why you feel that way." But they hit a certain point in my life where that wasn't working. I couldn't explain why I was feeling angry, upset, confused, elated. And BPD, when I got the diagnosis, explained all of that. So it was calming for me. It was, besides the name's freaking horrible, but, you know, a rose by any other name. In the end, I'm still dealing with the same issue. So I had to separate myself from Mum and Dad because I was living in that constant state of grief. And that was not because they weren't trying to help, it's because they were, but they were getting it wrong. And I've got a mate, one of my best friends up here, a bloke called Todd, and I go around to his place and catch up, and we'd talk, and I'd talk about my problems, and he'd sit there and he'd suggest stuff. And then one day I was talking and he said, "Jake, I just don't know what to do. I really don't know what to do. I don't know how to help you. I don't know how to fix you." And I said, "Todd, I don't need you to help me. You can't fix me. All I need is for you to listen to me without judgment. And occasionally I need a hug." And he stood up and he said, "Mate, I've been wanting to give you a hug for 5 years. Come here. So now we meet. Every time we meet, it gives me a hug. There's no macho bullshit in the way. There's no pretending or falseness. We're dealing with each other as honest humans. And that's what I needed to get back to with my parents. So when I left, it ripped me back down to rock bottom. I hit absolute rock bottom. I had no support circle. And while I'm not advocating totally isolating yourself for anyone, please don't rush out and make a stupid decision, because it was very traumatic. I think I needed to hit rock bottom. I needed to rebuild. I think my parents needed to hit an emotional rock bottom and rebuild. And so I spent a lot of time in my own head. I won't go too much into it because that's not the focus of tonight, but it was a lot of mindfulness, being aware of how my actions affected others. When I said something and I got a weird reaction back, okay, why did I get that? Is it what I said? Is it how I said it? Is it the volume at which I'm speaking? I used to get people telling me, Jake, just shh, because I would get hyper and I'd talk a lot. So where it's worked with mum and dad,
Can I butt in and ask a question? Sure. So, you know, your mum had done all this training around, you know, validating and all the things that make up family connections. You know, that first time that you started interacting with her, did you trust that things were different? Was it hard to get to that point?
No, didn't trust it at all. And the person who just asked about antidepressants, no, I'm not on antidepressants. I'm completely off medication. I was on antidepressants, but BPD doesn't require it. So your comorbidity stuff might, but medication isn't the ultimate treatment. But no, I did not trust mum and dad. I thought they were well-meaning, as they'd always been. But from experience, that hurt me. The people who I cared about the most also caused me the most pain because they didn't get me.
Because one of the things that we get with family connections, why I'm asking this question, is one of the things that we get with the family connections program is people say, yeah, I can try these skills, but you know, it's not going to make, is it going to make any difference? And I was just wondering, so when you reconnected with Liz, and obviously she was reacting to you differently, how long did it take you to trust that this was a different kind of relationship now?
Well, initially when they sent me a request to meet, I sent them a list back of conditions. Actually pretty convinced that they wouldn't meet them, that I was off the hook. It was, you know, if I say such and such, you're going to do such and such. If I'm leaving, then I'm leaving and you're following. If I tell one of you to leave, then that one of you will leave. I put a whole heap of conditions about what we could talk about. I was in charge of the conversation. You're there at my pleasure, so to speak. Things that back in the day would not have passed the test with mum and dad. And the first step was when they agreed to that. I got an almost instant response from both of them saying, yep, we agree. That was my first reality check. That was me then going, okay, things have changed. I need to go into this as best I can. So when we met, we did about 5 or 10 minutes of actual just small talk. So, you know, how are you? How's your day? Blah, blah, blah. All of us tiptoeing around the subject. And then after a sort of lull, I led with my emotions and I said, you weren't there when I needed you most. You said you'd always be there to support me no matter what, and you weren't. Cue the tears. They both sat there crying, not saying anything, which was my next sign. They've changed. They're not trying to contradict me. They're not trying to control this conversation. It's all going my way. So I really respected that. I really respected the fact that they were no longer trying to correct me. It was much more of an adult conversation than a parent-child conversation. And when Mum mentions that I got quite enraged at the second meeting, that was because of a trigger that came up to do with my ex-wife, who is one person that I have great difficulty forgiving for certain actions, and that's something I'm still dealing with. But I haven't actually seen her in a long time, so I'm not sure if I ever will resolve that. But what I walked away with was that after hearing that Mum and Dad had done so much, especially Mum, having left her job and finding out as much about BPD as she could, I couldn't actually hold the anger. If I was being honest with myself, I couldn't be angry at them because they'd done everything I wanted them to do, which was just listen. I wish we'd known this a long, long time ago, that we maybe could have set up conversations where the rule was person with the talking sticks talking, everyone else has to shut up. Because it gives you a chance to work through what I call the wave. So I find a lot of the times people with BPD want help, but the way they present asking for that help turns people away. And I often felt that I would be trying to get across desperately that I wanted to be heard, but the way I was doing it would push people away. And I sort of envisaged that I was a wave coming towards them, and this big wave coming at them, and it's, oh, what the heck is that? And as you do with a giant wave, you get a bit anxious and you look out for your own survival, and they would retreat from the wave. What I actually needed was for them to take a breath and go under the wave and let the wave pass over. Let the anger, the rage and everything just happen and pass over the top. And then at the other side, I vented all of that. I've got it out, and it's spent. I can then talk. I recognise this isn't the same for everyone. And 15 years ago, it may not have worked with me. But that's the approach now. And it's an approach I take with myself, where when I'm getting worked up, I recognise that it will pass. I recognise that that my first reaction is not necessarily a healthy one. So I live life a bit more balanced now. My motto when I was growing up used to be, well, if someone's going to do it, it may as well be me. So I was a risk taker. If no one else put their hand up to do something, it's like, right, I'll do that, and I'd jump in. And that served me really well on many occasions. Lead performances in school musicals. I was Australia's youngest commercial radio announcer. I was voiceover on local commercial television in Mount Gambier by the time I was 17. Things that are all about being upfront and putting yourself out there. But the other side is that I would also make impulsive decisions. And over time went by, they became more and more damaging, and I wouldn't actually recognise that in the first place. Sorry, my brain's gone on BPD.
Yeah. What I'm going to do, it's okay, because I'm going to get you to hold that thought, and we'll come back to it. But I did want to go to Terri-Lee. Can you say hi, Terri-Lee, so that you come up?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, so Terri-Lee, as a social worker in Victoria, you're running programs for people with BPD, and you're running programs you're running the Family Connections program with your carers. Can you tell us a bit about that experience of having the two parallel programs going?
Sure. Thanks, Jenny. So my kind of journey with Family Connections started a while ago when I work in public mental health services, and I've got a background in working with families as well. And I came into a senior position that was about enhancing the capacity of mental health services to work with families, and I still had a clinical role. And we know we didn't have very good treatment options available for people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. So about 5 years ago, in the service that I work in, we decided that we would implement a dialectical behaviour therapy program, which is one of the treatments that can be helpful for borderline personality disorder. And so we went down that road, and during that journey, I went off to the United States to go and do my training. I entered sort of a 2-year program. And I remember when I was in my training, I was super excited. I was going to be taught by experts. I was going to have all this knowledge. And I felt sadness as well. There was a real sort of sense of grief there as why didn't I know this sooner? And if only I had been able to use this earlier, how many people could we have helped? So I want to validate that it is hard to get treatment sometimes, and there is great treatment out there, and we're starting to get better at knowing what to do from a sort of clinical and treatment perspective. So we get going with our DBT program, and I keep having this thought, but what about the carers, and what about the families? What about the environment that people live in? And then I started to hear a little bit about the Family Connections program, and that the training was going to be available in Australia. And that just seemed to me to answer that question. And we went down the road of exploring if we could run Family Connections group in clinical mental health services here in Victoria. And we were fortunate, our organisation supported us to go off and train. So a small team of us went off initially to do some training with Ellen Frizzetti. It was fabulous, and we were excited, and it kind of touched on our DBT knowledge, but there was something really different about it because it wasn't just about clinical treatment and clinical intervention. It was really about stopping and understanding the family and carer experience, and that also contributes to the outcomes for people who have emotion dysregulation. And so we came back from our training with the sort of mammoth task of let's get some Family Connections groups up and running in our area. And we're in a rural area. For those who know Victoria, we're in Gippsland, so it's a large rural area. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and we can't be everywhere, but we got started. And what I loved about our Family Connections experience was that I was very fortunate enough to deliver my first program with a couple of carers who had lived experience who trained with us and were part of planning all of our Family Connections journey and delivering the program. And what I learned from that was just that how valuable it is when clinical people like me, who get all worried about treatment and diagnosis and outcomes and symptoms, meet with carers, and suddenly it all becomes very real and very meaningful. And I think we kind of achieved something that we just couldn't have done with our clinical heads on. And that was real connection and real support and real understanding. So it taught me, I guess, another level of validation about how to really connect with those experiences. And I was just sold on Family Connections from that point forward, and sold on working with my carer colleagues. And so since then, we've gone on to have more Family Connection programs here in Gippsland. We've got another one starting next week that we're super excited about. And we continue to try and work with our carers. And the other thing that we're thinking about, and certainly I think about a lot, is trying to find the next group of carers that may want to go on and be Family Connections leaders. So as well as sort of running our clinical treatment programs, and I treat people with emotion dysregulation, and I provide DBT, there's also this other work that happens alongside that. And I think those two really have to go together. And if it's not DBT as a treatment, there's other treatments out there. It doesn't have to be clinical care that makes a difference. But I can see how Family Connections certainly does make a difference. And for us, I guess for me, in treating people with emotion dysregulation, hearing, the real world, what's really going on, what's happening at home, how it affects everybody, and what people are trying to do to make things better is just so important. So I then had a lovely invite from the NEABPD Australia. Would you like to be involved in the steering committee? So I've jumped on board now, and here in Victoria, I'm super keen to help more people become Family Connections leaders so we can get this program out there. So if there's clinicians out there listening to this, jump on board, educate in your services, get change to happen, keep it on the agenda, and work with your carers in a real and meaningful way. And for carers out there, don't be daunted by all the technical talk and the jargon and the DBT language. You'll pick it up as you go, get on board, find good clinicians who'll support you or other carers that you can train with, and the more that we can get this out, the better. So we now do have family connections happening in Victoria, which is fabulous. And I think I can see some questions coming up about the family connections and how to get it training. And I think we've got Carolyn coming along soon to talk about that side of things.
Yep. So actually I will bring Carolyn in now because of any of us, I think she's a bit time sensitive. Carolyn, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's more I can't see you until you talk.
Oh, okay. I just want to warn you that my dog is sleeping and she snores. So it's not me, it's the dog.
My dog was chasing sheep in it, or rabbits or something in its sleep there, so I hope that nobody heard it. It might have been my dog you heard. But Carolyn, yeah, can you tell us about, because I just want to say that Carolyn and I have delivered a group out of the Fremantle clinic, which was great to do. It was, I think it's super powerful when you have, a clinic that's actually working with people with DBT and with, and I like to let Terri-Lee, you were referring to it as emotional dysregulation. And then to have the families involved as well, I think it's just real icing on the cake stuff. But anyway, yes, can you tell us about the leaders training and how people can get into a group and how they can become leaders and the mechanics of that stuff?
And I guess I'm not sure if we've really explained how Family Connections runs. The traditional program is the 12 weeks for 2 hours a week, with the basis being support, psychoeducation, and some skills on how to communicate more effectively and care for yourself. And I know that Perry has discussed some of the different ways that they've been doing it in America, and I've noticed on the chat that there's quite a few people who are interested in different formats. So I'm hoping that over time, given that Australia is such a big place, that we might be able to play around with some of those formats. The question about Family Connections training, it's a 2-day training event. It's 2 full days. And I guess what we are hoping to do is give people a rundown of how the group runs from week 1 to week 12, to give them some deeper understanding of some of the skills that we teach, which happen to be DBT skills, and also to give them some confidence and some understanding on how to some of the basics on running groups. What else would you like to know, Jenny? What else would be helpful? Oh, I've lost you. I can't hear you, Jenny. Sorry.
That would be because I muted myself. I was trying to be polite and not have my snoring dog. So I think basically if you're not a mental health clinician, it's important to have done the Family Connections group beforehand. Yeah, so you actually have the experience through the group program.
And I think even if you're a clinician, I think it's worth sitting in on the group first, because it'll understanding the training will be much more agreeable. I think you'll get the gist of how it unfolds. You'll also, if you're a clinician and you get to sit in on a group, which we did do in one of our first groups, Jenny, I think what happens is, as a clinician, you get a better understanding of what people's experiences are. And I think it comes back to something that Terri-Lee said earlier. And I think we have an understanding of what we think might happen for carers, but until you actually sit in the room and listen to their experiences, do you really get a sense of the difficulties that they face and some of the challenges.
And one of the questions, quite a few of the questions, and it's one that I've heard a lot as a carer counsellor, is, how do I get my person into treatment? I mean, what would you say to that? Because I know I have a standard answer, but it might be different from yours. Well,
I don't really, I mean, I just encourage people to perhaps, you know, see what's around. Every state, and even in Western Australia, it's very different. It's a bit of a you know, postcode lottery. So in terms of getting access to services, it can be a little bit hit and miss. So I guess as a carer, knowing where that help is can, you know, be of assistance, but really you have to take care of yourself. And, you know, in the model that we talk about in Family Connections, we talk about, you know, ourselves and the other person being in the transactional model. So as we make changes, it affects, you know, the people that we're responding to. And I think that if the carers can look after themselves and, you know, have an understanding of what's happening and feel more skilled, that's going to change some of the communications and maybe get a foot in the door and encourage the other person to perhaps go into treatment. That's happened in a few instances in terms of Family Connections. People have come in and said, oh my gosh, I just want to get my person to some help. And when the person with BPD's seen that the family member's gone and they're really benefiting and trying to understand and really get a sense of what's going on, that can be a motivator. Because I think for sometimes, you know, people with BPD, you are the problem. You know, that's how they're labelled, and it can get a little bit wearing. So I think sometimes when the carers take it on board to get an understanding and learn some different ways of responding, then that creates some openness and I guess a little more willingness between the two parties.
Yep, great. Okay, so there's lots of questions that have come up through the chat, but they're moving so fast, I'm losing track of some of them. I'm just going to go back to some of the questions that got sent in. We had a question about, and I might put this one to you, Perry, so I'll give you a chance to unmute.
Yes.
She's asking about, and in fact, it might be good to hear from Carolyn and Terri-Lee on this one later too, about people being reluctant to diagnose in adolescence.
Yeah, so this has been a long-standing issue, and it's thanks to Andrew Chanin, actually, at Origin in Melbourne, who really was the first to say this diagnosis occurs younger. I mean, not that other people didn't know it, but he was brave enough to say it. His first article actually was, Do We Dare Say the Name? And I think that it's important. I would venture to say that nobody develops the disorder later in life. I think we can see precursors of it in children, certainly in teenage years. There are behaviors that can develop into BPD, some don't. But with an effort that we've started called the GAP, it's really about early prevention and early identification of the disorder. And I think that's the way we're going to turn the disorder around, when we recognize it early enough and get young people into treatment. And along with that, you cannot treat a teen without helping the family. So it's important. It's a dual process here of helping the family know how to respond in different ways than they have. I mean, having a child that's challenging like that makes you quite disempowered. And so we need to work with the teen and we need to work with the families to put the system back together in a whole way.
Mm-hmm. We had a question about family therapy, you know, in the chat there, you know, is family therapy indicated? I know that in the States they've had DBT groups where they have multi-family groups in the DBT room, and the research has been good around that. But if that's not available, would you recommend family therapy, or do you think it's better to do a Family Connections separately and then the teen gets their own treatment separately?
Well, let me correct first. The DBT family therapy that we know about with adolescents, which is Alec Miller and Jill Rathis' program, it's not family therapy. It's teaching the families the skills with their relative in the room. And it's more about skill acquisition and skill application than family therapy. I think it's very hard when you have somebody that's really emotionally dysregulated to expect them to come into a room with their parents without teaching both skills. The teen or the young adult or the adult needs skills, as do the family members. So I recommend first that the system learns skills, and then they can do some problem solving and do other things that we think more of as family therapy.
Mm-hmm. Great. Let me see, what have we got? We had a question about the sort of challenges of splitting when you know, family members are, like in the case of the divorced family, and you know, the child really has the opportunity that most children do anyway, but in its most extreme form, to, you know, make one parent all good and the other parent all bad. You know, do you have any advice around that situation?
I'm sorry, who were you asking, Jenny?
Oh, Perry, I'm asking you. Yeah.
In terms of that they see that one parent is all good and one parent is all bad? Was that the question? Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, life is all perception and perspectives. So I think what you want to do is help the person with this disorder to think that maybe there's some alternate ways to look at things. And that's what we teach in DBT, that it's not just our perspective, but other people's perspective. It's a long process, though, because oftentimes, even in families with kids that are not so challenging, that there's good cop, bad cop. But part of the process is to help shift that dynamic and understand that it's not just one person to carry the burden of being the bad cop and the delivering the message.
Yep. Yep. I'm just having a quick look down the questions. Okay, the person that asked that question isn't online, so I'm not going to ask it. Sorry. Look, we've actually hit 7 o'clock. How do there are quite a lot of questions here. I don't know. I know that some of you have got time constraints. Do we want to carry on, or shall we just finish it at this point?
Well, can I make a suggestion that we could review the questions amongst the steering committee, and then we can see in some way how we can get the answers out to people, if that's okay. I think to run over is probably not in our best interest. I would also recommend that maybe Mary come on for a minute, just so people know how to register for Family Connections, and they get to hear from her. If maybe that would be our closing remarks.
Hi, Perry. I just actually got up the registration form now. I can see that there's a lot of people out there that are asking about the program and if it would be suitable for them. So yes, the program's suitable for partners of people with diagnosed or undiagnosed BPD traits and emotion dysregulation. It's also for parents, adult family members such as siblings, extended family and friends. And to register, if you go to our website, it's www.bpdaustralia.org, and it would be under the Family Connections registration form. So if you can just, that will put you onto our national Australia-wide wait list, and then when a program comes up in your area, we will send you an invitation. We fill the groups. Generally, the group size can be anywhere from a minimum of 8 up to 18. And it would be when we receive that email, we fill the groups until that number is filled. We tend to have those groups filled within 24, 48 hours. Perry, I think you know, it'd be really great if you would be able to maybe just tell the audience a little bit about the teleconferencing programs maybe, or the plans around that for 2019, and maybe even if the leaders here, they might be interested in hearing a bit more about that too.
Sure. So about 10 years ago in the United States, when we realized we weren't keeping up with the demand, and also we didn't have leaders in every part of the country, we decided to try what we've now called teleconnections. And that's the same course content. It's done on the telephone weekly. It's, instead of a 2-hour meeting each week, it's an hour and a half. There are 2 co-leaders and they go through the course. At first we were a little skeptical how this would work out, because part of what does work for Family Connections is the support group that develops. But we were wonderfully surprised to see that people connect as well on the phone, and when they've actually met in person later, it's like a major family reunion. There's just such a closeness that develops. So that's something that we hope to developing in BPD Australia. We also are now going to begin to look at making the course online, and that's going to take some time, obviously. But there's not any, Family Connections is now in 22 countries, and there's not any country that doesn't have a long demand. We can't keep up with the supply. And so if we can allow people to get on our websites, wherever those websites are, click on and right away get into a Family Connections course, I think it would be an amazing thing, because the wait lists we know are just too long. I also just want to let people know that if you go to the US website, which is borderlinepersonalitydisorder.org, we have over 1,000 videos up there. Many are based around Family Connections. Some are based on other things, but it is the largest media library in the world. And if you're waiting to get into a Family Connections class or just want to get some more information, it is a wonderful resource. So we hope you know, join us and become part of this large Family Connections community that's really global now.
And Perry, I think we've just had a couple of questions about the leader training.
Yeah.
I was just going to let people know, if anybody is interested in that, we do have one in Western Australia coming up, the 2 days that I think Carolyn mentioned, which is on the 8th and 9th of December. We're also looking to hopefully offer it in February in Queensland on the 23rd and 24th, so early next year. And but if you are interested, please send us an email, and we can put you on the wait list and let you know when the next leader training is coming up.
And what we've done in the United States, and we're working to do in Australia as well, is to live stream the trainings. So we have a training in New York next month, and we will be live streaming it to Poland, to Houston, Texas, to Canada, to California. So we might be a room of 75 people, but we'll have many more being live streamed and getting the program out even quicker through one training. So that's something we're working on in Australia as well. And we'd love to hear from you if you have ideas, you know, how we can get this program more widely spread. So please send us all your thoughts. We'd love to think them through with you.
That's awesome. So yeah, so we will hold to time, because this is going to be recorded. It is going to go up. We are going to have a look at all the questions that have come through, and you know, look at how we can answer those. Maybe we'll have a document that'll go out with the link to the recording. Yeah, and just in closing, I'll ask each of you to sort of, if there's one sentence or one paragraph that you didn't say that you wish you had of Carolyn. Is there anything that you think that people need to take away?
No, don't ask me.
Sorry.
Look, just give it a go. I think what I find is that the carers have been quite often very quiet, stigmatised, not being able to get out there and discuss what's been happening. And one of the most touching parts of the group is when people first meet and they realise that they're not alone. So you know, if you can get involved in a Family Connections group, if you are a carer or a loved one, you know, I'd really encourage you to please, you know, extend out and give it a go. It's worth it.
And I'm just going on who's next on my screen, so there's no favouritism here. Jake, have you got anything you'd like to say?
Yes, one of the terms they use for people with BPD is consumer, which isn't my favourite term for it. I prefer the term patient, and that's simply because it requires patience from all parties, the carer and the consumer and everyone around them, to get through it. So I'll just leave you with, we're all in this together. Yeah. Be kind to each other, and you know, we can make it better.
Yeah.
Over to Mum.
Yeah, okay, Liz, you've been...
Just had to remember to unmute. Thank you, Jake. I love you, darling. I just want to see more leaders in South Australia. I get comments and questions from people around the state wanting a program. I'm happy to talk to those people if you can do the leader training. I think generally it's it's a requirement that you do a program before you become a leader, but I didn't. And if you're in that position where you feel you could be a leader, talk to Mary. You don't have to have a diagnosis to, your loved one doesn't have to have a diagnosis for you to attend Family Connections. What else? Yeah, I love what I do, and I think other people would do too if they knew how much it helped people.
Yeah, absolutely. And Terri-Lee?
My takeaway message for people would be not to lose hope. There are people out there doing a lot of good work, sometimes behind the scenes, sometimes quietly, but change is happening. Just in my time of watching the sort of clinical picture and seeing what's happening out in the community, change is happening. So keep your eye out there for those opportunities.
Okay, and I think and so the last word I think has to go to you, Perry, because you were the first word in getting this whole program off the ground.
Well, I just want to thank everybody. It's thanks to the leaders that this program has legs. And without the volunteers and people being willing to spend time, and I loved what Liz just said, that she loves doing what she is doing, and that put a smile on my face because I feel so blessed to be able to do this. And I hope also that we can do more meetings like this. I would love feedback from people, what was beneficial, what they'd like to see more of. When I told I saw Andrew Chain in last week in Spain, and I told him about this meeting, he said, well, he's away. He said, but I'll pop on for a few minutes. And when I told Alan Frazzetti about it, he said, well, I'll pop on for a few minutes because he also is away. And I thought, no, we're going to save those guys and we're going to have them do a full hour with a meeting. So I look forward to doing other meetings the same way we've done this, and also in different ways, and getting experts around the world to speak directly to all of you. So
I'm looking at the comments. I've got to say, it looks like Jake's the star here. I think we could have a whole hour of Jake as well.
I think that's very true. That's so true, Jake. You were just wonderful.
Jake doesn't mind being centre of attention, so bring it on.
You're a gift to so many now.
Yeah.
And thank you, Jennie, for hosting this. It's not an easy job.
Yeah, can I end with a quotation that I just came across. Well, I was sharing today, and it seemed to me really apt way to finish on, because with emotional dysregulation or BPD, the darkest hours are so very, very dark. And this is from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who sort of wrote the book on grief. The most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen. And I think that describes people with BPD and recovery in my experience.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a beautiful way to end.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
And thank you to our Zoom folks who really stood by this whole hour with us.
Oh, it's no problem. We're happy to help.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good night, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.